Hello, and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and I'm delighted to have with us 6 sterling cozy mystery authors who are going to be chatting about their books and the writing life. But before we begin, I do have to pause for a brief commercial message. We do have copies of each of the author's current book available at the Poison Pen. So if you'd like to have us hold a copy for you or pop one in the mail, either give us a call or go online, and we would be happy to do that. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome in our authors, Lucy Burdette, Betty Hechtman, Ellen Byron, Katharine Schellman, Audrey Keown, who I hope I got her last name right, and Carole, who's on the move, but we hope to connect with her in a few minutes.
So I'm here.
My first question for each of you is tell us a little bit about who you were before you became an author. Readers are always fascinated by your backstories. So why don't we start with Lucy?
Yes, I'm Lucy Burdette. I used to be Roberta Islip before I became Lucy, and I was a clinical psychologist in private practice. That was my background. I became obsessed with golf and spent so much time and money on that, trying to learn it, that I started to think about what I could make out of that. And that led to my first now defunct series, the Golf Lovers Mystery Series, and I haven't looked back since.
How about you, Betty?
Well, I actually wanted to be a writer from the time I was a kid, and I used to make up stories that I would tell myself when I'd go for walks or when I went to bed at night, and the stories got so good that I was anxious to go to bed just so I could tell myself more of the story. I started writing things down when I was, I think, maybe 10 or 11. And then when I was in college, I worked on although I was an art major, I worked on my college newspaper. I wrote a column and I wrote news stories. And that was kind of what I thought I would pursue after college, but it didn't quite turn out. Then I wrote some stories, short stories and magazine and newspaper pieces. And I was a stay-at-home mom. And because my mother worked when I was a kid, I was sort of making up for that with my son, and I volunteered for everything. Every PTA thing. I worked on the school newsletter and went to every baseball game, everything, with all the kid things. And that was kind of, when he was old enough to be on his own was when I really got into writing and when I got into my books.
How about you, Ellen?
Well, I went to college and thought I was going to be an actor, and I went home to New York. I went to Tulane, and then I went home to New York. And then gradually I morphed into becoming a playwright, which led to writing for magazines, which led to me also being a poor playwright and deciding that I wanted to make a better living. So I came out to Los Angeles to write for television. So prior to writing my books, I was a TV writer, which I was actually doing simultaneously for my first 3 books. And so I worked on shows like Wings and Just Shoot Me, and more recently, Fairly Odd Parents. And now I'm writing my mysteries full time and loving it.
That's great. Katharine, who were you before you became a writer?
I was also one of those kids who announced, like age 6, that I was going to write books when I grew up. But I didn't do it for a while. I sort of assumed it would happen one day. I started out in political consulting right out of high school, and did that for many years. It was an interesting life. Very, very fascinating, but kind of a little bit soul crushing. So after I finished up undergrad, I was doing that at the same time as I was working as a professional actor and dancer. So I did that for several years. Loved doing that too, loved performing, but again, the lifestyle ended up not being really what I wanted to be doing with my time outside of when I was on the stage. So at some point I realized if I want to be writing books, I actually need to be focusing on that. And throughout all of that, I'd been writing off and on. I had 2.5 very terrible novels that I wrote during that time that no one will ever see. And eventually I ended up working on the book that would become The Body in the Garden, which was my first Lilly Adler mystery. And it was also terrible when I got to the end of it, but I thought it was terrible that could go somewhere. So that's the point where I started really focusing on writing as a career, and ended up sort of easing out of the other two things. And I've found that writing and the lifestyle that comes with that suits me much better than either politics or acting.
How about you, Audrey?
So I bounced around quite a bit. I majored in English in college, but I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And I always loved reading and literature. So I had every job from being a full-time live-in nanny to being an English professor in South America. I did a lot of things. And then I began to write for a newspaper, a local newspaper. A friend of mine had a job there and got me started. And then I freelanced for a magazine. And, you know, that sort of gave me the gumption or whatever to start writing professionally what I really wanted to write, which was fiction, which was the most fun to me.
That's great. And how about you, Carole, who's here as Elizabeth Blake?
Hi. Oh, yes. One of my many aliases. I have too many aliases. Well, I went to such a conservative, like Audrey, I was also an English major at such a conservative school that we didn't just read dead white males, we read dead white British males. I think there was like one course in American literature. And so it's very conservative. And then after school, I got very involved in playing rugby. And I was making a living doing comedy, improv, and acting. And then it became clear to me that I love doing comedy and improv. It's really fun. Acting is really hard work, and it's not that much fun. And I just like writing plays better. Like, I was much happier sitting in the auditorium and having other people, you know, act out stories. And then I just transitioned to books. I had a friend who was an editor, and in those days it was a little easier to break in. And so he sold, I had written a couple of Sherlock Holmes stories for an anthology, and then he said, you know, St. Martin says if you write a novel, I'll probably publish it. And I was like, what do you mean probably? I need percentages. And so he said, like, 70%. I was like, okay, fine. And so that was my first novel.
Great.
And I've never looked back.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's up for you now, the current book that brought you here. And we'll start again with Lucy.
Okay. I write now the Key West Food Critic Mystery Series, and this is number 11, which was out, is it last week, Ellen? It seems like it's been a long time.
Yeah, I know. It feels like it's been years.
So this one is called A Scone of Contention, and my character is a food critic in Key West. She goes on her honeymoon to Scotland, which is like nobody's honeymoon that you'd ever want, because she has to take some of the cast of characters with her, and they are staying with her new husband's family. And then naturally, there's an attempted poisoning. The chef is accused. She's made a connection with Haley, my main character, and then the race is off. It's based on a trip that we took in 2019 before the whole world went kaflooey. So it was really fun to write and be imagining myself in Scotland, not trapped in my apartment.
How about you, Betty?
Well, my book came out the same time, holding it up. One for the hooks. It's the 14th Crochet Mystery. And it actually started with the idea of, well, they were doing a lot of filming in my neighborhood. And I began to think about what were the rights of homeowners versus the homeowner whose house was being rented out for all this filming. And it moved on to the whole thing with Airbnbs now. And I found out that if you can do pretty much what you want with your house. I mean, you can rent it out for an Airbnb, and you have to notify your neighbors, but they don't have to agree with it. And I began to wonder what would happen on a cul-de-sac if somebody was going to do an Airbnb type, or actually temporary rental is the term I use, not to call it Airbnb, how it would affect the neighbors around it who weren't that happy about it, because it would certainly change their lifestyle. And then I mixed in drones and electric eels and all kinds of other crazy stuff, because my character Molly Pink seems to be a magnet for trouble. She's has recently turned around 50, and she's juggling her romantic life. She's a event coordinator at a bookstore where the Tarzana hookers meet, and she always seems to be taking in more animals. So there's a lot going on at her house, and it really it's like a tornado this time.
And Ellen, what's new with you?
Oh, well, hold on. Betty, you said Tarzana. Are you in Los Angeles? Are you in the Los Angeles area too?
Yes.
Yeah, because there Airbnbs here have been a huge problem, party houses, and they're a big problem in New Orleans too. And actually, my fifth Cajun country revolved around that issue. But this is my seventh Cajun Kiss of Death, and as you can see, it's Valentine's Day related, which is perfect timing for August. But in it, the main story is a celebrity chef decides to open a restaurant in Pelican. In some there are destination restaurants in little towns sometimes where the destination is going to this restaurant in the little town, and so he marks Pelican as the town to do this in. But of course, it creates many problems for the local restaurants and for the locals, and for Maggie Crozat and her family who are housing some of these people at their B&B. And there's also a subplot. Maggie gets married, but she might have a Valentine's Day stalker. So, and trying to figure out that. So there are basically two mysteries going on. And of course, there are recipes, as there are with a lot of our books, which frankly, for me, is sometimes the hardest part of writing the books.
Katharine, what's your new book?
So I'm writing a historical cozy series, which is a little bit of an oddity in this group, I think. It's the Lilly Adler mysteries, and I just had my second one come. Oh, thank you. Just had my second one come out last month, which is Silence in the Library. First one was The Body in the Garden, and they follow Lilly Adler, who is a widow in Regency, London. And since she's a widow, she has a little bit more social freedom than a lot of women in her time period would have. And she takes advantage of that because she has a knack for stumbling over dead bodies. So in the most recent one, she is unexpectedly visited by her father, who she has a very contentious relationship with. And in order to avoid him, she ends up going to visit some friends of his who he doesn't want to go see. And her second day visiting them, one of them is found dead in his library. And Lilly gets swept up in trying to figure out exactly what happened and who done it. And there's a roguish Navy captain and a kind of taciturn police officer for the new London police force, and all kinds of historical shenanigans. So they're very fun to write, and I hope they're fun to read too.
Great. Audrey, what about you?
Oh man, all these books sound so great. I have to catch up. So Ivy Nichols, and I wish I had a copy with me. I don't because I'm traveling, but Ivy Nichols is in her second mystery right now. She's discovered, really she hasn't discovered, but Ivy is a desk clerk at a hotel, a small boutique hotel themed around the year 1911. And so she has to wear a costume much like Marie Curie or Downton Abbey servants, something like that. And at the hotel where she works, a group has checked in who are a local chapter from Pennsylvania in town in Chattanooga, Tennessee for a national convention of the Association for Gravestone Studies. So they are kind of obsessive about the graves that are on the hotel property, the historic graves. And Ivy didn't even know they were there. It's Ivy's family's property. And it turns out the graves that are there are actually some of her family members. She didn't realize they were buried there. It's kind of been covered up. So it's a fun start for her because she's trying to figure out in the last book and this one, sort of who she is. She's trying to make meaning of this family connection she has to the hotel property. And at the same time, one of these gravestone studies members is found dead in her room, strangled to death. And nobody even knows how somebody got there because the only person who had access to the room at the time was Ivy's boss, who she adores, who's a great person. So when he's arrested by police because he's the only person with access, she just has to get involved again in solving a mystery.
That book is Dust to Dust. Is that
That's
correct?
right, Dust to Dust. It's the second book in the Ivy Nichols. Yeah, a title would be good.
And how about you, Carole/Elizabeth? What's your new book?
Thanks to everyone for remembering to hold your book up, because I wouldn't even thought of it. So there you go. There you go. And we're up. Death and Sensibility is the second Jane Austen society mystery. And quite frankly, it's my idea at all. It was what happened. It was a Crooked Lane editor came to my agent, and she had read this article about this big brouhaha that happened in Jane Austen Society in England, one of the English branches, and it was a real thing. Apparently, there was this really knockdown drag out fight. I don't know if fisticuffs were exchanged, but it was big. It made the papers. And Jane Dench was the president of the society, and I don't think she was implicated, but the senator came to my agent. She's like, I think this would make a really good story. Do you have anyone who'd like to write it? So I had to kind of audition for Crooked Lane, and then they went with it. And so this is the second book. The first one was Pride, Prejudice, and Poison. See how I did that. And this is Death and Sensibility. And I had blown up in my Jane Austen. I really did. I was not natural for that. But I have a sleuth with who lives in a hopefully charming little town in Yorkshire, North Yorkshire. I was very taken by Yorkshire. I spent a lot of time visiting the UK. And so settings really important to me. And I knew it was going to be set in Yorkshire when I walked into a pub once. And I said, can I pet your dog? And the guy sitting there said, oh, I likes a bit of fuss. And I went, oh man, anyone who talks like that, oh, I likes a bit of fuss. And so I thought, wow, Yorkshire's where it's at. And so it's at Yorkshire, and I have a sleuth. Of course, it's a murder in society, it kind of has to be. And so the unpleasant president gets snuffed, and everyone spends a lot of time chasing the killer and not really quite getting involved with the handsome local detective. But she kind of gets more involved in the second book. And this current one, actually, the new one, is set in the gorgeous historical city of York, which, of course, is in Yorkshire. And it's an amazing place. And once again, it's all about location for me. So I'm enjoying vicariously going back to Yorkshire.
There seems to be kind of a trend in publishing for authors to build a series around a hook or something that ties your books together. Can you talk a little bit about the hook you've chosen for your recent series, your current series, and why that appealed to you as a writer? Let's start with Katharine this time.
I would say the hook for mine is really the time period. It's set in 1815 in London, and at least that's where it started. The next book will be in a later year. But I think for me, it was a time period that I really enjoyed reading about, and which I thought I knew everything I would need to know to write a mystery series set there. Turns out once I started writing, I discovered I had a lot of research left to do, just having read tons of Jane Austen, which I'm also a big fan of. Did not quite prepare me for writing my own series set in that time period. But I think, so partly for me, it was just because I loved the time period. I loved the historical details and the everything that went with it. And I think for a lot of readers, it's equally the time period as it is the mystery setting. You get the mystery and the whodunit and following along with the clues and all of that, but then you also get the flavor of what was going on at the time and what these people in this society would have been doing, what people at different in different parts of that time period in Regency society would have been doing. So you get a little bit of the flavor of a different world at the same time as you're getting those very familiar and very fun beats of like, okay, here's the dead body, and now here comes the sleuth, and now here's what's going wrong, and how are they going to solve it?
So it's kind of come for the mystery and stay for the history.
Or the opposite. I think I get a little bit of both sometimes. I've had people message me and say, I've never read a mystery before, but I love things set in the Regency, so I picked your book up. And then I get people who say, I've never read anything historical before, but I love mysteries, so I gave this a try, and I think it can go both ways.
Can I ask a question about some of your fans? Don't you find that when you're writing historicals, there are certain people who just love to tell you what you got wrong?
You definitely get those nitpicky emails, and a lot of times it's nitpicky over things that are actually historically accurate, I've found.
I know, but I love when they're actually wrong, and they're like, nah, you didn't quite get that. I'm like, yeah, I actually did. But they're also useful because I've actually written down mistakes that I made and corrected them, you know, and they're sometimes really right about stuff.
Definitely.
Well, you know, Libby Klein, who's a fellow Kensington author, she told a funny story at a panel I was on that someone told her she got the Italian, because one of her characters speaks Italian a lot, and told her she got all the Italian wrong. So this person, she was like, oh my gosh, and this person helped her, and she did it, and she, you know, followed, you know, did what this person said for her next book, and then she got an email from someone else who said, you got all the Italian wrong.
Oh no!
Sometimes there's just no winning.
She writes the wonderful Poppy McAllister mysteries. So
Right.
Audrey,
I have trouble keeping track. I'm sorry, I was going to say I have trouble sometimes keeping track of the timelines. So and there are some bloggers who pointed out, and I'm like, where were you during my draft? I needed you.
You're actually in good company, because Tony Doyle couldn't remember where Watson was wounded, and he kept moving all around his body.
Oh, good.
And we all still love Sherlock Holmes, so it's just fine.
Okay, let's go to Audrey and have her tell us about her hook for her series.
You know, I think it's between two things for me. I think that the hotel itself is really a hook because it has that past-present connection. So it's themed around the year 1911. So that allows me to sort of play with some historical references and moments, and that's really fun. But also I'm allowed to sort of juxtapose, if you will, those past things with the present, and Ivy herself is able to think through sort of the freedom she has and what's different, and how her life would have been perhaps in the past. And then I think the hotel is a lovely place for the guests to go and get to pretend to be in the past in sort of a clean and romantic way without the actual gritty difficulty of the past. So that's really a hook. It also has this beautiful classic motif. It's a Beaux-Arts architecture, it's a mansion, and it's the kind of place where anybody would love to go and stay for a week, with beautiful gardens around it. So it's that for me. And also I think that Ivy is a character, she's a millennial, and she is having trouble figuring out her life because she is sort of plagued by panic attacks and the self-doubt that comes along with that, the self-doubt that comes with having been abandoned in her childhood by a parent, and being disconnected and estranged from this family who owned the building that is the hotel now. So I think that for me is a hook, because I hear from a lot of people who say that particular focus on mental illness, that it's a part of who she is. It's not all of who she's also just a regular person. And that's a small piece of who she is. And I hear from readers that really connected with them.
Great. Lucy, what about the hook for your Key West series?
I have the same double hook, as it sounds like most other people do. My series was not my idea. The food critic was not my idea. The series started with NAL, and they were there was an editor looking for somebody to write a series with a food critic, preferably with a tropical setting. So I love food. I love to eat and to talk and write about it. So that part was easy. And my husband and I had just retired to Key West, which is such an interesting, cool town. It's got at the top layer all the people who come down for a week and get drunk on Duval Street and have no, or come for Fantasy Fest and paint their naked bodies. It's not the real Key West, but underneath that is there's history, there are locals. It's just, and since it's such a beautiful place, a lot of homeless end up there, because if you were homeless, you'd want to go someplace warm too. So there's a constant conflict and balancing between the rich and the poor, and the people who actually live there and the people who visit but feel like they own the town. So it's been a really, really interesting setting. And the food critic part, that's easy because that means we have to go out to eat, my husband and I, and it's part of our research. So I made the decision to make almost everything real. So my character lives on a houseboat and there's a real group of houseboats, and that's where I imagine her to be. The restaurants are real unless I figure that somebody has to die in one, and then I make that one up. Some of the characters are real. One of my really good friends is both a minister and a police officer. And so he's in the book. And if I ever have questions about police procedure, he's my guy. There's a tarot card reader in the book, and he's a real person. So it's been fun.
How about you, Betty? What's the book, if you'll pardon the pun, in your series?
Yeah, the hook in mine is crochet. And it started with my own desire to learn how to crochet. And once I started working on it, I got the idea of putting it together with a mystery. It works very well because you get groups of people who knit and crochet. So I have a group of women and one man. And people tend to talk about more than just the yarn when they get together. So it's called social knitting or social crocheting. And it's an easy way to kind of get to know what their lives are and who they are. And conveniently, somebody always dies. And Molly Pink and the Tarzana hookers she's helped by the Tarzana hookers in finding out who the killer is most of the time. And it works. They meet in a bookstore, which is also a place that attracts a lot of people. I mixed the real and the not real Tarzana. Some is historic Tarzana, some of it is current Tarzana. There's a little bit, a touch of show business stuff too, because there are a number of people involved in the entertainment industry that live in Tarzana. So I have a veteran actress as one of the Tarzana hookers, Cece Collins, and there are like kind of flamboyant characters mixed in. One of them is Adele, who in this book has become the Adele because she's become a crochet influencer, and she's on YouTube all the time. This particular book was a lot of fun to write because I just kind of threw in all kinds of crazy stuff. And as I said, Molly seems to be a magnet for trouble and stray pets and stray people, and they all show up at her house.
Ellen, what's the hook to your series?
I fell in love with Cajun country when I was a student at Tulane, and my parents would come visit and we would just drive around. And, I'm a huge I love historical mysteries. So, Audrey and Katharine, and I love everyone's mystery here. And oh, by the way, Betty, I go to a needlepoint store, Needle Hearts in Tarzana.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. So I'm a regular there. That's my hobby of choice. And anyway, the history of some of the old homes and the plantations, both positive and negative, really struck me. I mean, more, and so keeping some of these houses alive to tell their stories is not easy. So I created a family that turned theirs into a B&B, and it's inspired by a couple of real places on the River Road. Although it says Cajun country, it's actually kind of more Cajun country adjacent, but I'm fascinated by the Cajun culture because it's so unique. It has its own language and its own food and its own music, and a culture within the culture of the United States really interests me because my mother is Italian. She came here when she was 3 years old, and I grew up with just Italian relatives, which actually features into my other series, the Catering Hall Mysteries, which I write as Maria DiRico. And so I really identified with that. A culture within a culture really spoke to me.
For those that might not be familiar with what exactly Cajuns are, can you kind of briefly explain?
Yes, Cajun. If you say the word Acadian fast enough, it becomes Cajun, Acadian, Cajun. And what it is in the late 1700s, in the 1765, I believe it was, the French Canadian, Catholic French Canadians were booted out of Canada in a diaspora. Do you say dia or dia? And it was called Le Grand Dérangement. And many of them ended up in Cajun country and brought with them their language. And then, of course, because that area is a real melting pot of different cultures, Spanish, African, French, and then indigenous, American, that it all kind of blended together. But the Cajun culture and genealogy is very specific to people descended from Le Grand Dérangement of Canada.
That's great.
And Acadian, not just the Acadian region of Canada, but primarily the Acadian region of Canada.
My parents used to live in Lafayette, Louisiana. And it's like they're like right next door to Cajun country. And
that's the heart of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they didn't live in like the real Cajun part of it. They were sort of adjacent, but it really is just a very unique culture. Like it is like nothing else ever.
I love it.
Have you guys read Schellman?
Yes.
Yes, of course. She's a fantastic author and had a very interesting life.
Yeah, I love her stories. There's a few of her. Of course, The Awakening is an amazing novel, just amazing.
Oh yeah,
I
way ahead of its time.
Oh my God, I know. I really like her short stories. There's a few of them that are like from the point of view of Cajun women, and I love that.
Yeah.
And Carole, what about the hook for your series?
Oh, can I start with a question for Lucy?
Sure.
Lucy, are any of your do you have seen the Fausto's Food Palace?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you asked.
Do you have any scenes at Fausto's Food Palace?
Oh yes, of course I do, because everybody knows about those. Yeah,
that's awesome. I still have little jars of jam that I bought last time I was in Key West. For anyone of you who haven't been to Key West, it's like this famous 100-year-old grocery store in Key West where everybody goes.
It's right downtown, so everybody ends up there.
Right. And also,
Very
I wanted to say, you mentioned the homeless people in Key West.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think Key West has the healthiest looking homeless people I've ever seen. It's just like they're all tan and kind of buff, In New York, everyone's pasty.
I don't know.
No, I know, but I mean, compared to New York City,
Yeah. Yeah, or New York, yeah.
Yeah. All right, sorry, I'll answer your question. I was just interested in what other people were saying. What was the question again? You asked about the book.
What you structure your mysteries around, the hook?
Man. Well, it's all about, I guess for me, it's really, again, about location, though. I guess the hook is the whole Jane Austen thing. And I think because I was insecure, I threw in a whole lot of Jane Austen hooks in the first book, and I'm like, I gotta back off. So for the second book, I tried not to put in quite so many quotes. It's so easy to find stuff on the web these days. But I was like, I want people to think I really know Jane Austen more than I really do. So I guess that's the whole idea of being the Jane Austen Society. And quirky characters. And I think for me, the fantasy hook is that my main character was in a bookstore, a used bookstore that she also, runs, but she lives upstairs. She lives like in the back and upstairs. And when I think about like, where would I really like to live? Yeah, on the corner of the Yorkshire Moors, maybe in a cottage, which is a used bookstore, and it is quite old. So for me, that's a hook, and I hope that is enticing to readers too.
All of your books have been classified and are marketed as cozy mysteries. How would you, as a writer, define a cozy mystery? What are the necessary ingredients? And I'll just throw that open, so whoever wants to answer.
Well,
I want to take much. Oh, you go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say the cozy is named after Agatha Christie's Tea Cozy. So that's how I think about it. We're in the we're in the history of Agatha Christie, and especially no sex, no violence on the page. And it sounds like, Audrey, you get into this too, but since I'm a psychologist, I always have people with problems, and I'm always trying to get them into therapy. And I'm always bordering on the edge of not so cozy. So,
yes, same with me. Yeah. But I think that cozy is.
She froze. She's actually in Ireland, which is amazing, and she's coming in from there. I'll fill in for Audrey until she gets her unfrozen. But I think also cozies have an amateur sleuth, and and I think Audrey, you back with us? So,
sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you can take over.
I didn't hear you, so please continue.
Oh, okay. I said, well, they generally have an amateur sleuth, and I think predominantly very little sex violence or graphic language. So, and I think they're comfort food in a way. There's something very, justice is usually served in them. They tend to not have the noir, they're not noir. So there's a feeling of satisfaction at the end, I think, for readers in general.
And you're not allowed to, not only are you not allowed to injure children or animals, you can't even give an animal a stomach ache. Because I know I tried that in my first book, and the publisher was like, no. I said, well, the dog is really okay, he recovers. We just can't, no, can't even do that. No, sorry, not gonna happen. So it's really hard to fit. I come from thriller, right? Like the other series that I'm working at right now are very dark thrillers, so it's really hard to make that transition. Can I just add one thing about the genre? Correct me if I'm wrong. Is the sleuth always a female or just usually a female?
I think usually.
Usually, but not always.
Not always.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a man. Okay.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I did in one book, I did have a dog kidnapped, but then I used another dog, the basset hound on my cover. His amazing sense of scent helped save and find the other dog.
Oh.
There were no dogs harmed.
I think your publisher was more lenient than mine. Mine came down on me so hard, they cracked the whip.
Okay.
I got criticized after the first book came out because the character's cat went missing. And some people wrote and said she didn't look hard enough. Well,
oh my God, that's so funny.
She did find the cat in the end, and she loves the cat, but she was busy with solving murders. So cozy readers have very strong opinions.
Especially about animals.
Yes, absolutely.
Really, I hadn't noticed.
I think sort of building on what Lucy said, leaning into that like legacy of Agatha Christie, I think readers want to be able to follow along with the steps of the mystery and how the sleuth is solving things and like to piece together clues with them so that they do get that really nice sense of closure at the end, like, aha, everything fits together. So I think the sort of fair play aspect of mystery writing is really present in the genre.
Yeah. I think I once, to help me, like, because I actually wrote a suspense, kind of quasi-cozy, more suspense. And I thought, and cozies are mysteries, they're puzzles. So mysteries are what happened. This is how I defined it for myself based on what someone else said. Suspense is what's happening, and thrillers are what's going to happen. So, or what might happen.
Well, that's a really good way of looking at it.
I think somebody else
Jonathan Mayberry
described...
had a definition. I think he might have taken from someone else where he said, in a mystery, there's a crime, there's a puzzle to be solved, and in a thriller, there's a constant race against time to prevent something from happening. And I know I'm paraphrasing, but something like that,
Yeah, me too. I think I first read it, Wendy Corsi Staub said it, and I
did you?
Kept it in my head.
Yeah, but I think you're really right about the puzzle element, that the puzzle, and I think definitely going back to Agatha Christie, kind of sort of didn't exactly invent the puzzle mystery, but really brought it to a great fruition with so many of her best cozies. Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your reading life. What was the author or book or both that got you hooked on cozy mysteries? Lucy, do you want to start?
Well, I read all the time as a kid, like I'm sure the rest of us did. All the Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, Cherry Ames, all those kid mysteries. I think the author that really got me hooked on foodie mysteries was Diane Mott Davidson. And she wrote, I don't know, maybe 18 books, and she had a character who was a caterer in Boulder. And I just love those books. I loved how she talked to suspects over food, and she had an entree into various activities in the town because she was the caterer. And you could tell how people cared about each other or didn't by what they fixed for them to eat, or that's my theory. So she's the one that really pulled me in.
Eddie, did you have an author that got you?
It was Agatha Christie. I discovered her in high school, and I just loved the books. And I read all of them, and I even now I like rereading them because there's such a feeling of the place, and I liked her sleuth very much, and I liked the fact that I really liked reading about England, and the fact that you could follow along with the clues, hopefully, and figure out who did it. Even though I did kind of notice a pattern after a while of some of her books, and I was able to figure out who did it. But with my own books, I like, when you're talking about the cozy mystery thing, I like to think that they're dead bodies, but everybody has a good time. That they're, you know, the books end with a smile, hopefully.
Audrey, was there a particular author or book that got you?
Yeah, there for sure was. Am I coming through clear now?
You are.
Yes.
Yes.
Great, perfect. So for me, it was Alan Bradley. His series that begins with The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie, the Flavia de Luce series. It's set in mid-century Britain. It stars an 11-year-old chemistry prodigy, Flavia, and she's just brilliant. The setting is brilliant. She lives in an old, falling apart mansion, and she has a chemistry lab that she sort of inherited from a strange uncle. And she's brilliant, and she peddles around the town doing things that adults sort of couldn't get away with.
Ellen, how about you?
Well, I think like everyone else, there was Nancy Drew. And then I was doing a summer program when I was 14 at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, and I lived in the suburbs, so I had to commute, and discovered Agatha Christie and never looked back. And, you know, I, like Betty, I reread them, and I think people don't realize that she had a very dry sense of humor too. I never forget, she described one character as having eyes the color of boiled gooseberries, and I didn't even know what a gooseberry is, and I was like, that's such a great, it told me everything I needed to know. And then, you know, about 10 years ago, I discovered the Elizabeth Peters, Amelia Peabody mysteries, and just, I went through a fascination with King Tut and bought all these books about the discovery of the tomb, and then I just read all of her books, and I just had a great time. Like I said, I love historical mysteries. So
Great. Carole, was there one author or book that got you started?
Well, I feel bad because I never got the Nancy Drew thing. I don't think I was aware of Nancy Drew when I was a kid, and everyone talks about it. I kind of want to go back and read them, but I was a Bobbsey twin reader. And it was, oh, did you? Oh, I'm so glad I'm not the only one. Like,
I love them.
Two sets of fraternal twins, right? Older and younger ones.
Right.
Right? Isn't that right? Okay. And the two younger ones, I was pretty little when I was reading it. The two younger ones were Freddie and Flossie. I did not imagine myself as Flossie. I imagined myself as Freddie. I was definitely Freddie. And you know, this whole gender thing, it's like, you know, I mean, don't all writers have, like, haven't we all sort of imagined ourselves in many bodies for many years? But so it was them, I guess, as a start. And then when I was a teenager, I just became obsessed with Sherlock Holmes. And I would spend time in the library at Duke, where I should have been working on Spencer, the poetry of Spencer. And I was like thumbing through Conan Doyle and looking at the original drawings and just got obsessed with that. So that was the start.
How about you, Katharine?
I like a lot of you all. I read a lot of mysteries growing up. I started out with Enid Blyton and all of her sort of like mystery set in camp in the mid 20th century, and it just seemed so much fun. My mom had read them all growing up, and she gave them to me. And then I eventually graduated to Agatha Christie, and I think in a lot of ways, Ms. Marple is sort of the original cozy sleuth, because she's just like always wandering around knitting and solving murders, and it's just wonderful. But I also had an aunt who passed on some of her Diane Mott Davidson books to me. And it was, I think that was the moment I realized like, oh, people are still writing these. Like this is still a thing that people are doing. And so after that, I was just like, oh, there's an entire section in the library that's just all mysteries. And it was an amazing discovery. And it was just sort of a given from there, I think.
That's great.
I also read Harriet the Spies and Encyclopedia Brown. I think I read a lot of mysteries as a kid.
Yeah.
Well, before we run out of time, we do have some questions from some of your fervent fans.
Oh.
And the first question I'll throw out to all of you. When writing about the murder weapon, how do you come up with unique ways to kill the victim? So I guess without repeating yourself, how do you do away with your villains?
Good question. Well, okay, so no, I in my upcoming, I have a series coming out in June, Vintage Cookbook Mysteries, and my character opens a shop in a historical culinary house museum in the Garden District of New Orleans, and she sells vintage cookbooks, which I actually collect, and then she also sells vintage kitchenware, and so I really wanted to use a vintage piece of kitchenware as a murder weapon, and I don't want to give it away, although it's obvious in the first chapter or second chapter, but I will. Okay, I'll say there's a very strange can opener from the 1930s that figures prominently into another character's demise.
I think that's really fun. I'm an amateur mushroom hunter, so I spend a lot of time in the woods, digging around in the dirt for wild mushrooms. And as probably everyone knows, some of them have names like Strong Angel and Cap. But there are lesser known ones that are also deadly. So that's a fun source for me.
Wow, that's cool.
And there are certain murder weapons that recur. Like if you're writing a foodie mystery, you're going to have poison come up more than once. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I am really bad at keeping notes and a series Bible that some people do religiously. So I'm lucky to have two long-term writer friends who read everything before it ever goes anywhere else. And they will remind me, well, you just clunked someone with a frying pan in the last book. So that helps.
That's funny.
I think really that's an issue. Sorry, go ahead, Audrey.
Oh, sorry. I really like to use something that looks like what it's not.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yes.
Super cool.
Can you give any examples about spoilers?
I'm sorry, will you repeat that?
Can you give any examples without giving a spoiler? Because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so I like to make it look like a certain thing on the surface, like maybe it looks like a suicide, for example, and then I like to play with that Ivy, because of who she is, because of what she's observed or who she knows or her particular way of seeing the world, is able to see through that facade and see that it's not a suicide, or see that the murder weapon, couldn't have been used in the way that the police suspect. And yeah, I guess that's as specific as I can get without giving too much away.
I think those stories are always so interesting. The murders that are masquerading as suicide. In real life, there's some really interesting ones.
Yeah,
and I think one of the tricks, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
was going to say, I think one of the tricks you just brought up with cozies is creating amateur, justifying why some average person like one of us could solve something that the police can't. You know, I know I work really hard to make sure the police are too busy or don't have the manpower, or my character can access people and find clues that they can't because people would, you know, close up or clam up and not reveal things.
Right.
That's a big issue in cozies. I think I teach writing, and I am always, unfortunately, having great premise, really great characters, but you've absolutely got to justify why your amateur sleuths out there doing what the police can. I think it's a problem. I know, I feel like it's a problem I always face.
Yeah.
My next question is specifically for Katharine, and they want to know, why are you such a firm believer in the Oxford comma? And for those of us that don't know what an Oxford comma is, you'll need to explain that too.
So it's if you have things in a series, the one that comes right before an and has a comma in front of it instead of no comma before the and. Or sorry, the one that comes right before the and has a comma after instead of no comma before the and. And I just think it's clearer to read. There's a great picture that, gosh, I think a teacher showed us back in high school, and it was an illustration of why the Oxford comma was so important, because the sentence was something about like the strippers, Hitler, and Stalin, which is, you know, kind of a terrible sentence, but with the Oxford comma, it was the strippers, Hitler, and Stalin. And so it was a picture of like some women in fishnets and then Hitler and Stalin. But then when it said the strippers, comma, Hitler and Stalin, then Hitler and Stalin were in the fishnets. So I just think linguistically, it's a little clearer what you mean.
And there's
funny.
There's a grammar book with the title, it's a style book called, and the title is Eats, Shoots, and Leaves.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna like not read a book that doesn't have Oxford commas in it. It's just my personal preference.
The next question is for Ellen, and this reader wants to know, what's your relationship with Martha Stewart exactly?
That's a great, someone threw me a bone there. Yes, I was a cater waiter for Martha Stewart. And if you have an old copy of Entertaining, or one of the original copies up until I think the mid 80s, or no, maybe the 90s, you will see on page 29, you will see me standing next to a Martha looking very downstairs in a little black skirt and white top and my hair in a bun, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres at the Cooper Hewitt Museum. And I love Martha. I learned a lot from her. I actually interviewed her in the early 90s when I was doing the My First Job column for Glamour, because her first job was actually working as a stockbroker. She was one of the first female stockbrokers, and then she took the money and started her catering business. And, you know, and I dedicated one of my books to her, because I actually will sometimes, what did we do? And in the catering series, I actually drew on some of, you know, when we used to transport stuff from her home in Westport to a party in New York, you know, I used some of what I remembered from those parties, you know, doing an offsite party, and wrote it into the book. So it was very useful. And I'm very fond of her. I keep hoping I run into her or connect with her, but she's huge.
Another reader wants to know, this is for Audrey, what is it about Chattanooga that appeals to you so much?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been living in Chattanooga for 20 years, and you know, I thought, why not set the mystery here? It's a great city. It's been named one of the top 10 small towns in America. It's not a small town, it's a small city, but it's been named one of the top 10 several times. It's been recognized by Outdoor Magazine. Chattanooga has a river running through it and several mountains. And it also has a deep love of the arts and a nurturing of the arts. We have a great art museum here. We have several breweries. I mean, it's a very walkable city, and it's the downtown at least, and a very bikeable city. And within, you know, 10 minutes, you can be outside the city on a beautiful hiking trail overlooking the river. There's just tons of biodiversity. I mean, I could go on and on.
That's great.
Another question is for Betty, and they want to know, what exactly is this crocheters versus knitters feud? Is it like the Bloods and the Crips, or can you explain it to a non-textile person?
Well, I thought I made it up, but actually it turns out that knitters feel superior to crocheters. And I don't know why, but it's like this undercurrent of knitters. Somehow it's a better craft. The only possibility is that one of the reasons that they call people that crochet hookers is somehow a long time ago, people that made lace were somehow women of ill repute, because I guess they did something on the side besides making the lace and so forth, because it was a very intricate work with it. But it actually it exists. I mean, I've gone into yarn stores where they look down on crocheters. There was one yarn store I went into, and the woman said to me, "Oh, we have a crocheter that comes in once a week. You know, if you want to talk to her." And it was, she wanted no part of crocheting hooks or anything else. It was all knitting, knitting, knitting.
Oh, Betty, I have to ask, was that a store in Studio City?
No, it was actually,
Okay.
you know, I know the store you mean. I have never been in that store, but I heard it's supposed to be a great place.
Well, it looks like we're almost out of time, but before we finish, I'd like to ask each of you to tell us one more time about your current book and how readers can find out more about you, whether it's websites or social media. Let's start with Lucy.
Okay. The book that's just out is number 11, A Scone of Contention. And you can find everything you want to know about me at my brand new spiffy website, lucyburdette.com. It's worth looking at even if you're not going to buy the book.
Betty?
My book is, oh, there I am. I guess the memorable thing is that the murder weapon is a bag of garbage, which somebody said they've never seen as a murder weapon before.
Nice.
Find out information about me on my website. It's bettyhechtman.com. Easy to find.
Katharine?
My most recent is Silence in the Library, the second Lilly Adler mystery. You can find me at katharineschellman.com, or I am most often on Instagram as at Katharine Writes.
Carole?
This latest is, on my phone because my computer is a horrible speaker. I'll put it in front of my face. There you go. Death and Sensibility, which is the second Boston Society mystery. And as befitting my too many pen names, my website is celawrence.com, which is not related to Elizabeth Blake, but you'll find it listed as one of my pen names. So it's celawrence.com.
And Ellen?
Oh, Cajun Kiss of Death is my 7th Cajun country mystery. And you can visit me at ellenbyron.com and sign up for my newsletter, because that's the only way you will access my secret downloads page, which has some recipes and the bookmarks and various other things. And there's also a link to a short story of mine that just came out in Suspense Magazine, The Artists of Charter Street.
Oh, that's great. Audrey?
I also have a great website with a lot of resources, audreykeown.com. I do a lot on Instagram as well, including interviews with other mystery authors like Ellen Byron. You can find those on my Instagram page.
And your latest book is Dust to Dust?
That's right, Dust to Dust.
Well, I'd like to thank all of our authors for joining us this afternoon, and for you for tuning in. This is another virtual event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for everyone for coming and for
everyone.
hosting us, Poison Pen.
Yes, thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and in
Bye-bye.
case I lose you because I'm not great with the computer, thank you all. You were wonderful. It was very entertaining. Please feel free to come back again if you're in the area, or virtually if we can get you.